Good morning. Kia ora. My name's Farzana Adams. I'm from the Fresh Produce Safety Centre, and I've travelled here from New Zealand. I'm based in Papamoa Beach. I'm representing the independent not-for-profit organisation, and I think it's clear that there's some pretty strong sentiment around the triple P standards, so primary production and processing, Rachel. And look, FPSC-ANZ sets the policy around it, and there's a number of primary processing and production standards that apply to a range of different food products. So things like seafood, poultry, prior to horticulture, the most recent one was eggs. So the egg industry went through a transition of moving from being a voluntary scheme on being GFSI recognized programs to being on a regulated scheme. And I think that was really challenging for the sector as well as they transitioned. So I think, Rachel, to kind of build on your point around the pain that everybody's feeling, these are transitions that other sectors have gone through as well, and perhaps some of the things that we could learn from those other sectors as well around how we transition. But really important to recognize that fundamentally the conversation that we're having when we talk about food safety is we care because we want to protect our industry, we want to protect our brands, we want to protect our consumers. And quite often the food safety conversation gets intertwined in a political conversation because there's standards, there's regulation, there's compliance, right? But fundamentally, I think all of us want to do the right thing. We want to make sure that we produce a safe product, that our consumers are going to enjoy, that it's high quality, and it's not going to make them sick. So the things that I'm going to touch on for the next 10 minutes or so, allowing a bit of time for Q&A, Rachel, I think, is sort of talking about the why. So the need for consumer safety and the need to protect our brand. What the Fresh Produce Safety Centre does, so who we are and what we do, and sort of how we go about that. These are some of the things that I'll share with you in the next 10 minutes or so. We heard a lot yesterday about the power of the berry industry and the collective of coming together as Berries Australia. And I think it's really important to recognize that food safety plays a fundamental role in that. Rachel talked about the fact that we haven't had a food safety incident for berries in Australia. There was a food defence issue. There was an issue around deliberate contamination and tampering, and we heard about that from Pinata Farms as well for those of us that were on the tour on Tuesday. Consumers demand safe food. They expect their food to be safe. I think they actually take it for granted. They don't actually recognize what it takes to produce safe food, the effort that it takes to make sure that every piece of fruit that we supply to our consumers is not going to harm them, injure them, or cause them to become ill. And in order for us to get that right, we have to proactively manage that as an industry. It doesn't just happen. There's a lot of work and effort that goes into getting it right. And in order to get it right, I think most people in this room will agree that there's a scientific basis of how we do things to manage risks, to understand the hazards in our products, and to manage those hazards to ensure that they don't manifest in the product. And this needs a multidisciplinary approach. You might need food safety scientists, you might need soil scientists. More and more we hear about climate change and the impact of climate change on food safety and changes in the behavior of microorganisms. So all of these things need to come together in order for us to manage the risks to food safety in the produce that we are producing. We're very fortunate in the berry industry that these recall statistics don't really affect us. But when we look at the FPSC-ANZ data, so that's the Food Standards Authority for Australia and New Zealand, it shows that fruits, vegetables, and herbs are sitting at number 4. And as Rachel indicated, the berry industry doesn't sit there, doesn't sit in that category. And I think you should be very proud of the work that we're doing. And it's important that we continue to maintain that and we continue to build upon that and that we don't get complacent because we need to proactively manage risks around food safety. Just a little bit about the Fresh Produce Safety Centre. So we're an independent not-for-profit organisation that was founded about 10 years ago in partnership with the University of Sydney and the International Fresh Produce Association, Australia and New Zealand. And that was because there was a recognition around having a need for a body or an organization that came together collectively across the industry, bringing research, industry, regulators together to look at the scientific evidence and develop best practice guidelines. You'll hear from Jane shortly around how that interfaces with the standards and the food safety standards within a GFSI recognized program. So just a shout out there to our pledger supporters. So we function because we get annual pledges from supporters like Coles, Woolworths, Aldi, Costa, IFPA, and then we have a range of sponsors as well that sit in our silver and bronze categories. Some of the brands are represented here today, and we appreciate that. Because that enables us then to provide that sort of bridge that looks, and we're currently reviewing the guidelines for fresh produce food safety. So it enables us to have the resources to look at where the science is evolving, where the science is currently. Are there any knowledge gaps or literature gaps? In the past, we've coordinated a range of research projects with students that undertake their PhDs that allow us to understand more about the foodborne pathogens that may cause issues in our supply chain. Our standards and our guidelines cover the end-to-end supply chain, and so that allows people to use those as a best practice basis for developing the food safety management systems. I'll touch on this briefly in terms of how the guidelines interface with the GFSI benchmark scheme. So the FPSC guidelines for fresh produce food safety, and then there's the requirements that come in from customers, market access requirements as well, so anything around export standards. All of those are requirements that we have to meet as industry in order to have products on the shelves. Those then feed into this GFSI benchmark scheme, so understanding that those are standards that are set and they get independently audited, and those are the certificates that allow trade, and then it allows you to manage risks like microbiological hazards, chemical hazards, and physical hazards. So looking at a systems approach for food safety and how we work together to get those food safety outcomes. The key resources that the FPSC is responsible for, so we're the custodians of the guidelines for fresh produce safety. We have a number of grower guides, simplified grower guides that we've also developed that we sort of get feedback, especially from smaller, medium-sized growers, that those are quite useful tools that they use within their businesses for training and support. So it covers things like worker hygiene, traceability, which is absolutely critical for us to ensure that we can trace product back to the source and all of those different touch points along the supply chain. We cover things like preventing the risk of cross-contamination. I have some information here as well. Susanna, if you can just stick your hand up. Susanna Rulof's our technical officer. So if you want any more information around those resources and guidelines that are available, you can get in touch with us as well. We've also recently translated those grower guides into 5 different languages, and we're getting pretty good feedback around the fact that the translations are helping, especially with communities where we've got English as second language, workers, so it helps in terms of communicating that information effectively. If you think there should be some more languages that aren't currently on our website, that's something we can help and support with as well. Just touching very briefly on some of the types of tools that are available within the guidelines for fresh produce food safety. So we look at the different types of hazards, things like profiles for microbiological hazards, so your classic Listeria, Salmonella, E. coli, understanding those hazards, and then the potential sources of contamination within your supply chain and possible mitigations around that. What are some of the production controls around growing sites, material sources and inputs? Water quality is really key, and understanding the quality of your water, your microbiological profiles for testing results, etc. And as you're really familiar from a berry perspective, the level of handling that we have of people that are touching our produce is very high. So that ability to ensure that your workers are well trained, have really good hygiene practices, and we don't want our workers contaminating our products, so that's critical. And then some guidelines around testing and monitoring as well. We're currently about halfway through a 3-year program of work funded through the Hort Frontiers program and a consortium of 11 funding partners called the Horticulture Food Safety Initiative. And this is enabling us to get out and about, connecting with industry, collaborating, and building a community of practice around food safety best practice, because we're all invested in making sure that our produce is safe. One of the highlights of this program of work, and we'd love to see better uptick of utilization here, is that we've developed a free help desk. So anyone can connect with us via that help desk. If we don't have the appropriate technical resource and knowledge, then we're connected in with a range of technical experts where we can connect you with the right technical expertise as well. And I think that's particularly valuable for people that are not already on a GFSI food safety benchmark scheme. So we can provide some support there. And some of those tangible resources that are available as well. I think there's a lot of opportunities ahead as well as we think about some of the challenges. I mean, clearly we're in a very complex regulatory landscape, and there's going to be some development over the next 12 months. So stay tuned on that, and I'm sure Rachel will keep you updated. But I think it's also important to recognize that we want to create a culture of getting things right. We heard from Rachel Robertson a little bit around respect yesterday as part of the keynote. And I think also in food safety, we talk a lot about the fact that the standard you walk past is the standard you've just created. So I think when anybody is out and about, everybody can be a leader in food safety, you know. So if you see somebody not doing the right thing, it's really important to speak up, because fundamentally all of that makes a difference to the final outcome. We heard from Angus Soft Fruits as well. John talked about education and the power of education and training to elevate. So how do we balance that against rising costs and kind of the need to recognize that investing in people pays off? And I just wanted to finish off with this quote from Mike Knowles, sort of a bit like our conference chair. I typed into ChatGPT, can you create a graphic from me on the future looks very bright, as a quote from Mike Knowles, and that's what I got sped out. So I completely agree. What a fantastic industry to be part of. The future looks very bright. Let's get the basics right to keep thriving. Thank you.